So our last panel, ladies and gentlemen, First Nations authority and decision making. We're going to be looking at the experiences of our three panelists in terms of First Nations authority and decision making. You know, they will speak about those things that they would like to speak about, but I think we did share with them certain questions related to jurisdictions that they might feel should be prioritized in this move to a nation-to-nation relationship. The questions about the importance of capacity and capacity development, whether or not there is an identifiable continuum as nations take the path towards the assertion of inherent jurisdictions, and what responsibility, if any, they see for the federal government as they move to assert that authority and take on those additional decision-making roles. So we've got three panelists with lots of experience. Marilyn Slett is Chief Councillor for the Heiltsuk Nation. Roger Williams is the Chief of the Gwetin First Nation and Vice Chair of the Tsilhqot'in National Government. And of course, Grand Chief Doug Kelly is Chairman of the First Nations Health Authority, among several other responsibilities. So I'm going to ask Marilyn to lead off, and she's assured me she will not feel that she's been thrown under the bus. Marilyn, go ahead.
Spreading to the village site and vital food harvesting area.
As it entered the mouth of Seaforth Channel, the course was changed, slamming into the reef and the rocks at the mouth of places we call Tsilhqot'in, Gale Creek.
I was on one side of the boat, not knowing that there was planks pushing on the barge to try to keep it off the rocks from going further into the beach. And just as I was putting that way, the tug itself sunk. What did you think? It was heartbreaking.
I had a trap line in that area. So coming out of Spiller, all the way around to Matheson, it's called.
Our parents would take us out of school and take us out there. And we lived there until all the food was gathered for the winter.
4 sockeye groups in the area. And it was a big area with carpets that can easily be damaged. It's devastating to everything in that area. Hams, crabs.
I know my grandson digs slabs every winter, and my son goes out digging slabs every winter. And that's their livelihood. What are they going to do now?
I practically grew up on a boat. It hurts so much that the oil spill had happened, or I can't, or where I provide my clams, where we get our cow farm as okay, where there's fish, where there's food that we could eat, we could provide. But now we can't because of the oil.
Good afternoon. Before I start, I wanted to also acknowledge the traditional territories that we're visiting today and that we're having these important dialogue discussions with the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. I also wanted to acknowledge and thank the Institute on Governance for asking Heiltsuk to be a part of the important discussions that we're having here. And I also wanted to acknowledge my colleague that joins me here today, Pamela Wilson. If you can give a wave, Pam. Pam is our, she serves on council with me, and we've worked together for probably at least the last 10, 15 years together. So it's a real pleasure to be here with Pam today. So I'll get started. We were going to discuss an expression of our asserting our jurisdiction and our decision-making over our traditional territory. So this is a map of the Heiltsuk territory, and we have approximately 2,400 people that comprise and make up the Heiltsuk Nation. And we're located on the central coast of British Columbia, and it's a remote island, isolated island, and it's only accessible by boat or by flying in. Our territory is much larger than Bella Bella. It's 35,553 square kilometers. And as you can see with the video that we shared, we're sea people, we're mariners. That's what we do, and that's how we have sustained ourselves for thousands and thousands of years in our traditional territory. So everything that we do is interconnected to the land and the sea. One of the things I think is important to share with you today is we are an elected body. Pamela and I are elected members of council, but we work really closely with our traditional leadership in Bella Bella, with our Heiltsuk traditional chiefs. They are the chiefs that hold the title over our territory, and we fully support, our traditional leaders, and we've worked together. Probably it's been 15 years as a really collective and collaborative relationship with our chiefs, and that's part of the reason why I know we're stronger for it. We're able to carry that full sort of strength of our people when we all work together that way. Just to speak really briefly on capacity in terms of administrative leadership, legal and political mobilization, and negotiated agreements. We're very progressive in institutional capacity. One of our newest institutions is our Integrated Resource Department, and that department is the stewardship arm of the Heiltsuk Nation, and we thought it was really important that we really couldn't effectively manage our traditional territory without that department, and it's been integral to stewardship and the management of resources. We also have taken really progressive steps around education and health, which I know I'm really also pleased to be up here with my colleagues here. It's a real honor to present with you today. In terms of legal and political mobilization, we have a Gladstone Aboriginal right, and this is a commercial Aboriginal right that was affirmed in the Supreme Court of Canada in 1996, where we harvest and sell spawn on kelp, and we're just completing a SOK season right now in Bella Bella. More recently, we joined forces with neighboring communities around the pipeline of Enbridge and the coastal nations, and successfully challenged Enbridge in judicial review. we've really used all different methods of getting our message across, and that sort of thing. 2 years ago, in 2015, it was our community members that really had said that it was enough in terms of the herring management and how that was DFO's current regime at that point in time. Our people were really afraid that our herring stocks were going to be fished to extinction, to another collapse, and decided to occupy the Department of Fisheries, which is a field office right across the channel from Bella Bella. Although, you know, we've employed different methods of getting our voices heard, the last 2 years, as a result of that occupation, we have negotiated joint herring management plans with the Department of Fisheries in 2016 and 2017. In terms of negotiation agreements, we've been signatory and part of the Great Barrier Land Use Order, carbon credit agreements with the province, and created our own conservancies within Heiltsuk Traditional Territory. So a lot of capacity. One of our most recent agreements is a framework agreement with Canada, and it's called the Heiltsuk, and that's our framework agreement for reconciliation. And that sets out a pathway forward for sector-specific negotiations. And one thing to share with you there, we're not looking for a full, it's not a treaty process that we've engaged in. It's one of the exploratory tables with Canada. But we're looking at incremental agreements that support Heiltsuk and our agenda in terms of moving forward. So the example that we wanted to share with you here today is we played the video at the onset of the presentation. Heiltsuk is a jurisdictional authority is not a new concept for Heiltsuk. This is something that we've practiced for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, since time immemorial, and it's something that we've never given up our rights to our inherent self-government, and with that right also comes that responsibility, and that's something that we've taken really seriously with our community, and we have that responsibility to monitor and to steward and to manage the resources within our traditional territories. So in terms of the Nathan E. Stewart, exercising our sovereignty at a time of a disaster was essential in maintaining our Aboriginal rights as a self-governing nation. And just to give you a bit of a brief overview, the Nathan E. Stewart was loaded with more than 109 liters of diesel oil and lubricants. And the incident occurred just weeks before a clam fishery was scheduled to take place. And to this day, there's still areas of what DFO calls Area 7 that is still in effect in terms of a closure. And Heiltsuk, under our own authority, has also issued a broader fisheries closure notice to the community, and that applies to our sustenance fisheries, our food, social, and ceremonial. So at approximately 1 a.m. on October 13th, the Nathan E. Stewart ran aground at Gale Creek in Seaforth Channel. And this area that it ran aground is basically what we call our breadbasket for Heiltsuk. It's one of the areas, it's quite close in proximity to the community, but it's also very rich in different resources. At 9 o'clock, the tug sank, and our hereditary chief that was on the scene came back in on October 13th and said that, you know, our beaches were compromised within minutes of the tugboat sinking. It took virtually minutes to contaminate the beaches, and you know, we're still living with those closures today. This is the map of the fishery closure. and it sets out the areas that are closed. So one of the things that we did is we, as we were going through the mitigation and the cleanup efforts and the removal of the barge and the removal of the tug out of our traditional territory, our tribal council and our hereditary chiefs, said that we were going to do our own investigation. Our community wanted to know what happened, and this investigation was going to be conducted under our Gwe laws. And our Gwe laws are our customary set of laws that embody our values, our beliefs, and our teachings, and also consequences to our way of life. The report was undertaken by the Heiltsuk, and it was an exercise in our sovereignty, and it was also, as I said, to determine what happened with that disaster. So the report is complete. We made that report available to our community on April 6th, and what's next is an adjudication committee. And they're going to take our report, and it's a 6-person adjudication committee, and they're going to determine whether or not there's been a violation to our traditional laws, and they're going to prepare a written decision. And that committee is made up of 3 traditional chiefs, 1 tribal councillor. You heard Peter Lanton earlier this morning talk about a peace treaty that we have with the Haida Nation. With respect to that peace treaty that we have and that alliance and governing traditional relationship that we have with them, we've asked them to have a traditional Haida chief also as part of our adjudication committee. So they've appointed a Haida traditional leader as well. So the oil spill changed our lives forever as a community. And to this day, our community is still grieving with the effects of the oil spill. And the questions that we've had and the questions that our community brought forward is, to what extent is the spill impacts? Who is responsible? What can be done to repair what has happened? And how can a similar disaster be avoided? So these are questions that we brought forward when we were doing our investigation report. And our report is, the backbone of our report is the Heiltsuk responders that were out there on day 1. Our director of our integrated resource department got a call about 4:30 in the morning on October 13th to let him know that there was a barge that ran aground, and they actually gave him the wrong location. So he mobilized really quickly and got people out there daybreak, 6:30 in the morning. Pamela was one of the first responders out there on that morning as well. But with that, it's just been a really difficult time, but it's also been a time where our community came together, and our resilience as a community is what really got us through the whole incident. You can see some of the pictures up here with the diesel on the beach, the ineffective booms that were on the beach, the extent of the diesel spill on the early, when the tug eventually sunk that day, and the weather conditions that we have on the Central Coast in Bella Bella. So these were all factors in terms of the investigation and how we were able to partake in the Unified Command. One of the things I should share with you, so when this happened and we had our people out there on on day one, and they were there as responders. We got word, and we only got word because our people were out there, and they overheard on the VHF the Coast Guard talking to each other on different vessels, saying that they were setting up the unified command in Shearwater. Shearwater, if you have never been to Bella Bella, is right across the channel from Bella Bella, and it's a fishing lodge. It's a marina. It's a eco-tour, or it's a tourism lodge. So we got to work right away and got in contact with the Coast Guard and different federal representatives and said, no, this unified command is not being set up in Shearwater. This unified command will be set up in Bella Bella. This happened in our backyard, and this is something that will only happen here in our tribal administration offices. So it was a bit of an arm wrestle to have that. It was, it took a few meetings, a conference call, and eventually later that day with the polluter that came into the community, he had representatives that flew out from Texas, and we met and appointed a unified commander, and that command central was set up in Bella Bella, and it was really participating in a process that was never set up to include First Nations people, but we felt it was really important that we were a part of that process. So part of the rationale for the investigation report was, of course, to report what happened, to our community members, and it was really troubling on many levels to conduct this. Among the findings of the report was the consistent failing of Canada and Kirby to disclose information about events that were unfolding in our traditional territory. We had provided many letters of request to Canada, to Transport Canada, to the Transportation Safety Board around access to vital information for our investigation, and were denied. It didn't really fit with the reconciliation mandate that Canada had. So with that, the government didn't really cooperate with us and didn't really want to answer our questions. There was no consultation that occurred during the context of the oil spill. To delve a little bit deeper on the lack of consultation, we'll look at it in three different levels. One at a macro level. Heiltsuk was not consulted about the implementation of the Marine Liability Act or the world-class tanker system and potential impacts that this would have on Heiltsuk Aboriginal rights and title. On a regional level, it was only at the time of the spill and after the spill that we found out that the Pacific Pilotage Authority had been issuing waivers to fuel barges that have been transiting through our traditional territory, and this allowed them to go through our traditional waterways without a local pilot on board. And on an incident level, the Transportation Safety Board and Kirby repeatedly refused to include Heiltsuk as a party to the investigation and to disclose critical information around what was unfolding in our territory. And most recently, the Transportation Safety Board declined to engage in preparing a joint investigation protocol. After our report was made public, we did get the TSB reached out to us and wanted to speak to some of our people that were interviewed in our report, and that's when we said, well, why don't we engage in a protocol, and this protocol can be used in the future, if anything like this happens in another nation's territory. And this joint protocol can, set, a pathway forward so we don't experience or other people don't experience what we experience. But that was declined by the Transportation Safety Board. And maybe we're not there yet, but we have to persist and we have to keep moving forward, with those types of engagements, because I believe that we will get there someday. So some of the findings of the report, just to sum it up really quickly, there was a lack of communication after the tug sank. There was a lot of chaos at the scene. There was a failure of equipment to contain the spilled oil. There were lengthy delays in non-Heiltsuk responders arriving to the incident site. There was confusion and breakdowns in the chain of command. There were delays in getting materials to the site, insufficient oil response materials, ineffective response materials. In one of the photos that we showed earlier, you can see the weather conditions that we have, and the booms just couldn't withstand, the tidal and the climate that they were trying to use it in. There were weather conditions and wind conditions that occurred, delays in deploying the response materials, and insufficient information being provided to Heiltsuk first responders around safety instructions and safety gear being out there, and how to use the oil response materials, putting them at risk for exposure to diesel fumes. So in launching the investigation report, Heiltsuk held a media conference which resulted in some press coverage. And one of the things that we also did during the Nathan Eastwood incident is we invited many of many of the ministers responsible, Mark Arnault, Transport Canada, Carolyn Bennett, the Fisheries Minister, and also the various regional directors in Bella Bella. Catherine visited our community, but one of the things that we maintained in these meetings is this is not going to end when the tug and barge is lifted out of the water. We know from experience of our neighbors to the north with the Gitgat and the Exxon Valdez that we're going to, bear these impacts for many years to come. So I am pleased to say that we have, formed a what we call after the spill, and it's comprised of Catherine and her colleagues in the various federal departments and our senior councillors at the tribal council level, and we are discussing the impacts and how we can not walk away, but look at this in terms of what we can do better going forward, and what we can do to mitigate this in the future. And we meet on a monthly basis at the moment, and next month we'll be hosting a symposium in our community around the oil spill. We have a website that you can download the report if you'd like to view it, and that's available. And I have a copy here that I'll provide for the Institute on Governance, and I just want to thank you for your kind attention, and Gwetin.
Chief Roger, do you want to?
Sanaya Janam Taltanas Nandit shan Tsilhqot'in Tsilhqot'in jirani PGAG. Agwajit nahonan kai nus tuning kal darapan Tsilhqot'in ayat kawarait in asal zi gat bit ein tajit ein is negarin e. It's my honor to be here. I want to take this time to thank the Coast Salish, the First Nations, whose territory we're on here. And this drum here is the heartbeat of our nation. That's who we are. That's our land. That's our resources. That's our history. So I want to sing this song. It's my mother sang this song. It's we call it Tsilhqot'in. And this song is about the rivers, the Tsilhqot'in River, where they join, and the laws. In our history, a lot of our creation stories, how our land, how Tsilhqot'in came to be. Our people used to talk about our people, the animals, the fish and the bird, we all spoke Tsilhqot'in. And there's legend stories of how that changed. And this song is about one of those. So I'll share this song with you. Tsilhqot'in Gwetin ilhala Tsilhqot'in heyo heya heyo heyo heya heya hey Tsilhqot'in Gwetin ilhala Tsilhqot'in heyo heya heyo heyo heya heya hey. Chanaya. I guess I have the freedom to walk around with this mic on me. Yeah. It's an honor to be here. I see a lot of our, we're talking about jurisdiction, lands, and resources. And I'm going to time myself because I get carried away. Yeah, 3 minutes went by already. But that's why I didn't put this on until now, eh? I got 15 minutes. Yeah, learned that from the Grand Chief. I think of a Tsilhqot'in. A Tsilhqot'in is a Tsilhqot'in person at 1862, prior to smallpox. This person was very powerful. All the laws, the traditions, the spirituality, the honor, the respect. When that person took you into their home, it was like your home. And then you look at the impact of smallpox. Imagine when we lose our people. Imagine you're losing 80, 90% of your people. Some of these people may be one of the most powerful, most respected that you lose, and someone has to take over. 2 years after the smallpox, they wanted to build, there was a gold rush into the Tsilhqot'in. And the Tsilhqot'in warriors took action to stop a railway from coming into the Tsilhqot'in. And from then, how the government handled it. Treason, talking about peace treaty, tricking our warriors, and then they were tried and hung. That's who Tsilhqot'in, that's who we are. Then you add into residential schools. You take the Indian out of the child. You put all that together, and that's what we as Tsilhqot'in, we as First Nations are dealing with. I think of a declaration that our elders put together back in August 23, 1989. That declaration in short says nothing is going to happen without our involvement. We didn't agree with commercial road building, commercial logging, commercial mining, flooding, because there was a time where they were going to flood for hydro. My whole community, Xeni, was going to be underwater. That declaration has been the law of the leadership. That was the direction that the elders and the people gave the leadership of Xeni. And that declaration is what we've been pushing for, and we're still trying to implement it. From there, you're looking at a trapline who recognized trapline? Hudson's Bay Company, the government. We trapped, we hunted, hunting and trapping is the same thing to us, because when we trap, it's our food, that's our clothing, that's our medicine, that's our tools. So that's the tool we use, because we've seen that trying to sit down with government under their legislation does not work for us. So filing a trapline case, and then an out-of-court settlement where the company agreed to stay out of our trapline for 5 years, and then that same company wanted to go another area that's not in the Tsilhqot'in trapline, place we call Tsilhqot'in, Brittany Triangle, between the Tsilhqot'in and Tsilhqot'in rivers that create the Tsilhqot'in River, and that they wanted to harvest. Our people didn't agree. We had a 2-month roadblock. A lot of people were involved. We had other Tsilhqot'ins, other First Nations, local non-First Nations, who, some of the non-First Nations operators in our area, been there for generations. My uncles, my aunts, my grandparents have history with them. It's been a long journey. I'm thinking of a time where our people stood up in 1989 and said that nothing is going to happen without our involvement. 1991, our people have been paying for range fees for our cattle and horses. And we kept getting told that there's too many wild horses. So our people made a decision. We're not paying government no more. We created our own process, and our people start paying the Maya Valley Stockmen's Association. And it was a trying time because the government tried to scare our members who were paying to this Stockmen's Association to our own. They were told that they're going to lose their cattle and horses. We told our people that through our elders, you get those letters to us. We'll let the government know that you have no jurisdiction. This is our land. They're paying to us. So talking about jurisdiction, we as people, as individual, that jurisdiction has been impacted. You go from smallpox to Tsilhqot'in war to the residential school. Jurisdiction, that power within that asaidan that was within us has been changed. And jurisdiction is us. We have to own what we do. We can't blame District of Indian Affairs. We can't blame BC. We can't blame the logging company. We can't blame Canada. We have jurisdiction. But that impact, asaidan, we got to get back to asaidan. Our language, our culture, our land use, our ways, our people. Bringing asaidan back, since our tidal wind is the most important to us. We had a leader that passed on not too long ago. He said that they've used our land. they got to pay for it. They want to keep using it, they got to pay for it. That's our theme. Jurisdiction aside that. And that's the power. In our history, power, our medicine people, very powerful. We were taught that if you have bad intent, you take shortcuts and things fail, it's all on you. It's people you love that's going to get hurt. People you care about that's going to get hurt. So our strongest people, our strongest leaders were scared to use their power to better their position, to better their living. And that's what we need to get back to. Because power hasn't done us, it has impacted us. So when we talk about jurisdiction, I have a young Gwetin who has a couple, and they have a young daughter, and they're a role model in our community. They started our wagon trip, Gwetin wagon trip to the Williams Lake Stampede. When I was a little boy, that's how I used to get to Williams Lake, in Team Horse and Wagon. That's not that long ago. And this is what we're doing. And this young man is saying, you have to own it if you want to heal. You have to own it if you want to get somewhere. Everything you do, if you want to eat healthy food, if you want to stay in shape, if you want a role model, you got to own it. You can't blame somebody else because you don't have it, because it's up to you. You can't say, you didn't feed me healthy food. You weren't a role model. This young man says, you got to own it. That's, to me, that's jurisdiction. That's a side act. That's something that that's very important in our processes to really own it, to be a side act. We got a lot of people in our community, in my nation, very strong in Tsilhqot'in, very strong on the land. They're hustling and working. They're in universities. They're in college. But we got a lot of our people that are struggling. They're hurting. There's drugs. There's alcohol. There's gangs. There's violence. There's abuse. That's important to us. We have to deal with that. No one else. We got to own that. We can say smallpox. We can say residential school. But that's not going to help us. We have to own it. Sitting down with BC and Canada is going to be very important. We never had the resources. When we want title, we never want money. We want land. We need resources to hire our own people, because our own people are experts. We got people who are thriving in universities and colleges, out on the land, speaking the language. Those are the people we got to resource. They're going to help our people. And that's what our theme is when we negotiate, is that we want to be involved in our Tsilhqot'in territory. There's got to be revenue sharing in our Tsilhqot'in territory, but there's also got to be our laws. We have, how did Tsilhqot'in get created? This drum song talks about, and many drum songs that we sing talks about our creation of who we are. Spirituality, physical health, education. We have to get, how many First Nations in BC? How many languages in BC? What about Canada? What is Aboriginal rights? What is Aboriginal title? What is residential school? What kind of programs and services are each community have? What is a tribal council? What do they do? What about friendship centers? That's not taught in school. That has to be taught in school. Not only to Aboriginal people, but to British Columbians, to Canadians. Because when they grow up, they need to know the foundation of this North America, Canada, Turtle Island. And only then, as British Columbians, as Canadians, we're going to move forward. Because you ask every person you hear in the news, you read on the paper, millions of dollars going to First Nations. And then there's still gangs, there's still drugs. What's going on? You know what? I can tell you stories of our members who are in universities, who are hustling out there, but they're not hired because they're Aboriginal people. Because they get their houses free, their education free. I can bring you into our home. I can bring you to our schools. You know? So I really believe that British Columbians and Canadians got to learn about the first people of this country. We got technology today. We have bright, young veterans here that are going to really teach that. We can do that in our own schools, in BC, in Canada. Now that, to me, that's important. I got 2 minutes left already. I just got started. But, you know, I know that there's going to be questions. Untitled Land, we found out very, very interesting since the trial decision of 2007, 7 years later, the Supreme Court of Canada decision. And we found out that BC, they did meet with us because some renewal of permits and license in the court case area were 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we said, well, we're in court, maybe 1 or 2 years, but they never come back. And pretty soon we find out after the title win, we were saying we need a smooth transition. You know, BC, you can continue your jurisdiction in title land and transition until we take over. And then we find out 2 things. One is that right on June 26, 2014, they just went like this. Ooh, we got no jurisdiction. And we just understanding. And then we found out more that some of the operators they were like between 2007 and 2014, their permits and license weren't renewed in some places. What were they going to do? They kept going. And some of these operators, they sell and buy. Some of them are there for generations. They created new activities. Under the jurisdiction of BC, this was happening, mismanagement. So now today we're sitting down with BC and they're going to help us clean up that mess. They're going to help us in transition when we take over. So jurisdictions is about transition. Asghaidan is about transition. And, you know, our youth is very important. Our elders are very important. And we have, for the last 3 years, we have, time's up. We have title rangers, and there's trial and errors there, but they invite you to title land. The first law is you can't hunt on title land. The second law is the August 23, 1989 declaration is the law on title land, approved by the Tsilhqot'in nation. And you're welcome to our territory. You can explore, but you're going to have to honor our declaration. And we will permit you to do that. And that at the end of the day, that this title land is your title, but there's a jurisdiction. As long as you follow that, you'll have your freedom in title land. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I bumped into a young caregiver about 2 weeks ago by the surname of Parnell. And I asked him if he was related to Frank. And he said, yes. And then who do I bump into when I walk in here but Frank? And Frank told me that everyone's had a Frank Parnell story today. And he said, my record's almost 100%, so I want you to make sure it's 100%. So I see he's not here, so he must have trusted me to be true to my word. I met Frank probably about 60 pounds ago. Some of you might measure it in years, and so you're probably thinking 35 years or so. In any event, that was in the days before the First Nations Summit was the First Nations Summit. Before the First Nations Congress was the First Nations Congress. I think it was the Regional Forum when I broke into politics some 35 years ago. So, not here to talk about jurisdiction. I don't want to be here for the next 35 years. What I want to talk about is governance. For me, that's what's most important. When we came together in May 2011 and British Columbia Chief said we've had enough of the sickness system, we want a wellness model of care, and they approved the creation of the First Nations Health Authority, they made it really clear we're to stay out of First Nations jurisdiction. We're to stay out of Section 35 rights. And so we do. None of our business. I can help advocate to change certain kinds of policy, certain kinds of programs, certain kinds of investments, but I have to stay out of jurisdiction. Before we created the First Nations Health Authority, the Government of Canada routinely ignored the province of British Columbia. The province of British Columbia routinely ignored the Government of Canada. They didn't talk to one another except to argue over how much money was owed by the federal government to the provincial government for services provided to Indians on lands reserved for Indians. Whether it was the master tuition agreement, whether it was services for children and family, whether it was medical service plan premiums. That's the only time they talked to one another. They did not talk about outcomes. They didn't talk about whether our children are getting the quality of education that they should be getting from that system. Shame on them. They did not talk about whether, in fact, our children and families that were broken up and children taken into care, whether their interests were actually addressed. Shame on them. Health Canada did not actually check to see if the BC government was providing the kinds of health care that they ought to have been providing to our people. Shame on them. That changed with the creation of the First Nations Health Authority. And it wasn't an easy change. Let me tell you something that I've discovered in this journey of the last decade. There are some, grandmothers mostly, aunties mostly, parents for sure, they want to change the world. They want a better place for their children, their grandchildren, and those that have them, great-grandchildren. They are not happy with the status quo. But there are some that are doing very well by the status quo. They do not want change. They're threatened by that change. And some of them occupy those ivory towers that make decisions about us every day. They're in Ottawa in headquarters offices. They're in Victoria in ministry offices. They're taking decisions routinely about us without knowing who we are, without knowing what we envision, not knowing what our priorities are, not knowing about our experience and our capacity to make a difference within our own communities. When we created the First Nations Health Authority, we made sure to partner at every decision-making level within government in terms of Canada, the province of British Columbia, and all of its delegated authorities like each of the provincial, regional health authorities. I always say it this way, no decisions about us without us. So we have a table created with senior folks from Ottawa, We invite senior folks from Victoria, the BC Ministry of Health Services. We invite each of the CEOs from the regional health authorities and the provincial health services authority, together with our senior decision makers of the First Nations Health Authority. They take decisions together. That's important. To me, that's what governance is. Governance is about shared decision making. But it's not the kind of shared decision making where you get a fishery officer coming out and talking to chiefs and say, what's our fish plan for this year? And then the fisheries plan says, the fisheries officer goes away and says, we have a plan. And then as soon as the commercial fishermen are allowed to overharvest, your plan is shut down and you're out of the water. Not that kind of shared decision making. Because that's what we're used to. That's why Chief Marilyn Slett is up here saying things have to change. All of those laws that have been passed, have they actually protected fish? Have they protected the environment? No. Why? Because you've got a flawed decision-making system. You've got a system that allows junior officials to tell whoppers to their boss. The boss tells a bigger whopper to the regional director. The regional director does their best to misinform headquarters. Headquarters gives bad information to the minister. That's today's reality. That's why there's no fish in the oceans. That's why the water's warming. That's why climate is changing. You want change, you have to change the system. Most of those folks in the system are quite happy with the way it is. I'm not. I know our chiefs in British Columbia are not. Our grannies, our aunties, our grandparents, they're not. So we created the First Nations Health Authority. It's built on some very simple guiding principles. Community-driven, nation-based. Acknowledging those that live with the outcomes of our decisions should be first and foremost every time we consider a decision. We should be looking at increasing First Nations decision-making. We should be looking at improving services. We should be looking at collaboration. Changing the world is heavy work. The government of Canada, doesn't matter how good-looking Trudeau is, doesn't matter how sunny Trudeau feels, he cannot do it on his own. Doesn't matter how well-intentioned the Minister Bennett is, she cannot do it on her own. We need to work together. We need to make sure that we bring all of the parties together. That's something that we need to do. We need to increase First Nations capacity. We have to make sure those that live with the decisions are an active player in taking those decisions, but more importantly, they're resourced so that they can do their share of the work to implement their part of those shared decisions. For our work, we need to make sure that we're without prejudice to First Nations interests. Something the federal government might look at, something the provincial government might look at. We also have to make sure that we operate in an efficient and effective manner so that we're not spending more, we're spending smarter. We're not working harder for the sake of working harder, but we're working smarter. Those are the directives that our chiefs gave us in May 2011. So what we're doing now, as part of changing the world, there's some people concerned that doggone Doug Kelly is trying to take over the world. Well, I'm not really. I don't want control of you guys, thank you very much. On a good day, I can manage my own behavior. I'm certainly not going to try to manage yours. But what the Health Council, not that doggone Doug Kelly, what the Health Council's after is changing the world. To achieve our vision statement, healthy, self-determining, vibrant BC First Nations children, families, and communities. I really appreciated Roger's remarks about how it begins with the individual. They are responsible. That's self-determination. They are responsible for the choices they take every day. Blaming someone else doesn't get it done. We have to own our part of the problem, and we are, and we will. But please get out of our way if you're a decision maker. Don't obstruct a community that has its own plan to change the world in which they live. Don't create artificial barriers like central agencies do. I've had the pleasure of meeting now with the Deputy Minister of the Employment and Social Development Canada, a lovely woman by the name of Louise Livonian. Do tell her I've said kind words about her because they're true. But when I first met her, she was the Associate Deputy Minister of Finance. And she said, "We're all about accountability." And I said, "You're all about rules, and most of them are stupid. You should be more concerned about outcomes." That became a really interesting dialogue. I said to her when I was negotiating with Health Canada that I had a similar argument with Treasury Board. And the payments that were made by the Government of Canada in that year we were negotiating hit $20 million for medical service plan premiums. That Treasury Board analyst had the nerve to tell me that they're all about accountability. I said, "What outcomes did you get for that 20 million bucks?" "Well, we gave it to the province." I said, "Did you check to see if the province was providing services?" "No, we didn't." I said, "So how do you know it's value for money?" No answer to the question. I can tell you what regional health authorities are doing. I can tell you what the BC Ministry of Health Services is doing. They're reducing services in Terrace and they're moving them to Prince George. They're reducing services in Hope and moving them to Abbotsford. They're reducing services in Port Hardy and Comox and they're moving them to Nanaimo or Victoria. They're reducing services in Cranbrook, and so folks in Tanaka are going to Calgary because it's closer. What the hell is going on? You're telling me you're about accountability? I call BS. And I'm not talking about brown sugar. So let's understand something. This is how we were able to secure the approvals, because we had everyone on side except for one minister who's no longer minister. There is a God. You just have to be patient. And you have to pray every day. And once you finish praying, as my Auntie Xeni tells me, you have to get off your knees and meet God halfway. So, we are in the process now that we've built the authority of making progress on the social determinants of health. What the hell is that, you ask me? Well, I look at it this way. When, in my case, my daughters became pregnant, the first contact my daughters had was with the health system. He's making me waste my time. I only have 5 minutes left. So the second time they came in, again, it was the health system. But after that, when my children were early enough, they started going into early childhood education. From early childhood education, they went into Head Start. They went into making the earth move. If I have time, I'll tell you a joke and a story. It happens to be true. I'm a storyteller. You can tell that. Occasionally, the stories are true. This one is. So after that, it was the public school system. And so you track every one of our children. They go through the ministry of this, the ministry of that, the department of this, the department of that. That's what social determinants to me is all about. It was up to our family to make sure that my daughters were prepared to be parents, that they had a home, that they had an income, that they were well provided for. And that started by me making sure that I was a responsible dad, that my now ex-wife was a responsible mother. There's things that we have to do. And the laws today make some of those tasks very challenging. So for me, instead of fighting about the law, which lawyers have been doing forever, and it doesn't produce significant change, and I can tell you what happened when I attended a justice summit a couple months ago in Ottawa. There's a report on federal sentence reform which was carried out about 21, 22 years ago. The whole purpose of that effort 21, 22 years ago was to reduce the number of Indigenous offenders in custody. So they looked at a report, the statistics from that 20 years. Guess what happened? Every number went up. We had more and more of our people in custody. And guess what? It's the same people in that room, maybe not the identical same people, but the same professions, talking about what systems need to be changed to reduce the number. I had the gall to ask all those judges and those lawyers and the Crown prosecutors and the police if they thought they were any smarter than the folks that were there 22 years before them. And what made them think they were smarter? Because that same august group made things worse. I was the lone Indigenous leader in that room. I'm nobody's token. I could only tolerate that BS for about 3 hours and I left. I didn't go back. The system will not change itself. It needs to be held accountable. And the way you do that is through partnership. We have partnerships now with 6 deputy ministers federally, 6 or 7 provincially, and we're working on government-wide responses to better improve outcomes in our communities, whether it's education, advanced education, children and families, poverty, employment, social development. We're working on all of those things. We're going to follow the same model that we have with health. For us, it's about collaboration and partnership. For us, it's about shared decision-making and reciprocal accountability. Because when we take a decision, we have to make sure that we do our part. But we also have to make sure that our partners do their part. And sometimes they don't appreciate being held accountable. But that's what partnership is all about. So that's the work that we're doing. We're opening doors for First Nations to do the work themselves. We're not doing that work. I see my equally long-winded brother with the hat on sitting in the back, Chief Wayne Christian, not Ron Ignace. One's a fossil, and what's the other one? A relic. I never remember their nicknames. One's a fossil and one's a relic. You choose. Wayne and I often debate, argue, but when it's time to work, we work. And what we've done through the work of the First Nations Health Council is the creation of partnerships around making sure that we improve children and family outcomes. Wayne, as a tribal president and a former member of the Health Council, is now working to lead the development of their own model of care for their children and family, based on their jurisdiction. Now, not everybody's ready for that. We're not in the Fraser. In the Fraser, we're taking a different approach. We're going to develop a governance model where there is one standard for the care of children and family, and whether it's a delegated agency that delivers those services, whether it's a community that delivers those services, or whether it's the Ministry of Children and Family Development that delivers those services, it's one standard. It's one process. It's one governance decision-making structure. We hold ourselves to that table, we hold ourselves accountable, and we get the job done. So on that note, it's 40 seconds past my time. I'm surprised Roger didn't cut me off. I'm sorry, Roger. Roger and I tease one another. He must be a brother from another mother because he's a windbag too. So I appreciate the opportunity to share a few words with you. I think the journey to jurisdiction, the journey to a nation-to-nation relationship requires a significant overhaul in governance. And that's the work that we're doing with the First Nations Health Council in terms of transforming the sickness system into a wellness system. That's the journey that we're taking in terms of making progress on the social determinants of health. We're doing our job to make sure that we reform, transform governance so that First Nations on the ground can make those decisions themselves, that they can decide what investments ought to be made and not be tied down with foolish rules developed by some central agency official who has never been in our communities and doesn't have a clue what will work or what won't work. So thank you, Scott, for giving me an additional minute, and thank all of you for the time this afternoon.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, now, 3 excellent presentations. Surely there are questions about this. While you're thinking about it, Marilyn, the only thing that I don't know about your First Nation and its own source revenue, but I can't help worrying that the investigation and the Adjudication Committee, that's costing money, and is that, where are you finding that money? Are you getting help from the federal government, or are you being forced to reallocate to pay for that from essential services?
The resources to pay for the investigation came from Heiltsuk, and we carried that out as a community, as a nation. It's certainly, we are bearing a lot of costs as a result of the diesel spill. The whole polluter pays is really just a notion. It's not a true polluter pays system.
Yeah. Any questions out there? Yes, yeah, please.
Hi, thank you so much, Paul, for the presentation. My name is Marilyn, and I work with the Canadian Environmental Agency. Thank you. My question is to Chief William. You talked about getting resources to hire your own people who are out on the land and they are the experts speaking the language. Could you talk a little bit more about what that might look like?
Well, through the negotiations with BC and Canada, there's different types of agreement, and from that there's a bit of revenue that the nation has been able to collect, but certainly it's a portion of what it needs to be. And in that, the nation, because they know that throughout the territory, we'll need those type of people and in our territory. But for the interim on title land, there's title land, declaration of title land, and there's a piece of land outside of title land that's proven title that late Judge Vickers ruled that was outside of the court case. So in those areas, we have these rangers that would be eventually enforcing our laws and also BC's laws. That because one of the two will be, dealing with what's happening on the land, and in our area, you got big game. We have fisheries, we have salmon. So those, some of those numbers, like the moose numbers, are really concerned. They're fairly low. The sockeye doing, pretty healthy, but you got the steelhead and the spring, the numbers are getting impacted. So these rangers will be monitoring and looking at and informing, really really right now is educating. This is what's going on. This is what it is. So, most people are good, but you got few people, including our own, that being human, they'll try and get away with stuff. But for the most part, eventually what we're thinking is that they will be enforcing the laws as we move forward. So it's a transition process. Okay.
Thank you to everybody. They were wonderful presentations. My question is for Doug Kelly. Being inside government, I can always tell when something is a success because everybody says it was their idea. and so I've been struck at how many people, federally at least, that I run into say, this was a great idea, I've been pushing it for years. So, but I'm really interested on the ground. How does it feel? Because essentially, you're a living example of a First Nation institution which is taking space and by necessity kind of pushing others aside to create that space. How much cooperation do you really feel you're getting on the ground from all those other institutions, the BC health authorities, BC and federal ministries? Are they happy, willing partners, or is it begrudging? What's it really feel like on the ground?
That's been a journey. When we started working on those partnership accords, Ed John, Joe Gallagher, Wayne Christian and I went into a meeting with the CEOs. This is going back about 5 years ago, I think, something like that, 5, 6 years ago. And it was like everyone wanted to look at the bottom of their shoe. And who stepped in dog poo? Their nose were wrinkled. They got ugly looks on their face. Every one of them. They wanted nothing to do with us. That's the reception that we got. So it's taken time to confront them, to challenge them, to inform them, to educate them, to bring them to that place where they are now active, willing partners. Really calls for an attitude adjustment. But we also have to understand something. When we first met with Nigel Murray, then the CEO of the Fraser Health Authority, and we were talking to him about, some were calling her a racist, a nurse in the Hope Hospital. I'm not sure that she was a racist. I never met the woman. I think she was just cranky, and she was miserable. And when you're sick and you're not well, you don't respond well to someone that's cranky and miserable. You might be married to him, you're still not going to respond very well. That's what my wife tells me anyway. So I think that should be fixed pretty easily, right? So we raised it with Nigel Murray at a meeting, at one of our quarterly meetings. And his old body language he melted into his chair. It really bothered him, and he looked and he said, I need your help. I have 25,000 employees in the Fraser Health Authority. I had no clue. So he can make the commitment to improve services, to do a better job, but it's going to take some time to drive it from the top, the CEO's office, to the bottom of that organization. So in that respect, we're pushing, we're getting there. We're looking to create opportunities for caregivers, whether it's in the Hope Hospital or Abbotsford or wherever, that they have an opportunity to participate, engage in First Nations culture, events, spirituality, all of those things, so that they can develop a greater appreciation for the people that they're serving. It'll happen.
Doug, can I ask a quick question? You mentioned, 2 or 3 keys: shared decision-making, partnership, reciprocal accountability. Have you got the time and the resources? Are you doing any kind of documentation of what's working in these areas? What values you're applying, so that others can see them as a wise practice that they might replicate? Can we get a hold of that? People are asking for it.
So what we're working on now is, in our agreement, our tripartite framework agreement, we have a commitment for a 5-year evaluation. So we're about 60% into it. So
Okay.
we're developing that plan to do just that.
Okay,
We
excellent.
want to make sure that we do an evaluation that's going to serve our purposes. And so the initial plan that was developed didn't talk about governance. And for us, that's what this exercise is all about. It's about governance. And so that we're continuously working on that plan and making sure that we're gathering the appropriate information so that we produce an evaluation report that will inform us, inform our chiefs and leaders, but also inform other interested parties.
Great. That's good to hear. Any other questions?
I have a question for Marilyn. When talking about livelihood, have you, your nation, been compensated? And can you put a price on it?
We were just heading into a clam fishery when the diesel spill happened, so it was an unsolicited amount that was given to the nation to compensate for last year's clam fishery only for 2016. But at the moment we're doing our data gathering, and we're planning for filing a notice of claim for the losses that our community is incurring. And right now, no, we can't put a number on it.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank our panelists. 3 excellent presentations, and really appreciate taking the time.